Okay. It's good now, right?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Diane Gayeski from Ithaca College in the US, and she's professor in the communication management and design, specialty communication and learning strategy. And maybe you should correct me, Diane, if I'm doing some mistake here, but I understand correctly your specialty. She's also interested in the application of the artificial intelligence in higher education and also corporate communications. So I asked her to join us today and talk to us a little bit about this, her specialty, which is communication. And I'll invite Diane right now to join us. Diane.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. I am going to share my slides here and hope that you can see that okay.
Yep, we can see that.
Okay. So yeah, so I'm coming to you from the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, Ithaca College. Cornell University is on the other hill. There are colleagues over there. I've been invited to talk about student evaluations. A few years ago, the folks who put together Harvard business publishing newsletters asked me to do a short blog on student evaluations and how professors can better react to those and use them in a positive way. And it got quite a bit of attention. And I was asked to do a webinar on the topic about a month ago, and we got more than 2,000 people on the webinar. So it seemed to be kind of a hot topic. So I want to share some thoughts and experiences with you about this. I come to this from several different perspectives. Um, as it was mentioned, I'm a professor in communications, specifically business and educational communications and learning media at Ithaca College. And then I also have a consulting company, Gayeski Analytics, where I've been helping organizations to apply new methods of communication and learning. But for 11 years, I also served as dean of the school. I've been a department chair. I've been an associate dean of faculty, and I've taught for more than 50 years now. So I've experienced my own share of student evaluations, as well as reading student evaluations of thousands of student evaluations of my colleagues, and have been in a position of having to make tenure and promotion decisions based on those. So that's kind of my background and context. So I guess I would start out by asking everybody just to reflect back on how they felt their own student evaluations went last semester. I assume that most institutions, at least in the US, are now doing some form of end of course feedback from students. I think it's getting to be more of a popular practice across universities. And I think most of us have mixed reactions and almost go into this process with some degree of dread. I will share my own, some of my own student comments from my last semester. So one of the courses that I teach is an introduction to public relations. And we ask the students, their digital online evaluations, they ask students to comment on enthusiasm and things like outside assistance. And so, you know, this was pretty nice. It seems like the students appreciate it that I taught it as if it were a real public relations office. They feel like I wanted them to learn, that I was experienced, I was approachable, Those are things that students seem to really care about, and we like to measure at Ithaca. But we also get other reactions that are harder to understand. My very favorite one in 50 years of doing this, was said for one of my very good colleagues, is Rob was a great professor. His socks always matched his tie. And you may have gotten some feedback like that. While it may be complimentary, you sort of wonder what the purpose is and what students were thinking in the process of doing this evaluation, which, as most of us know, can be very, very important to our careers and certainly to our own psyche. If you ever want a good laugh, just Google professors reading their student evaluations. I will share a little bit with you.
Heard Professor Mount used to be a stripper. You've been listening to the wrong people.
Professor Hurl's horribly disorganized. Lectures make no sense. People fall asleep or leave halfway through. At least he's hot. Take that as constructive criticism.
If you're looking for an entertainer, Heath is probably your man, but be advised, the traits that distinguish a good philosopher are sorely missing in this professor of mediocre verbal and analytical skills. That's not badly written, that one. That's pretty good. There you go. I amuse you like a clown.
Professor Young speaks too fast. The word too is spelled T-O. Professor Young speaks too fast, and she only summarizes the reading for a lecture, which is long and brutal.
Professor Wong is rude, arrogant, and although, quote unquote, bright, should not be teaching anyone in any course at any level. Good luck. I guess my one response is that it'd be great if I didn't teach anyone in any course at any level, but I have to teach my 2 hours a week to get myself.
So I will kind of move on from that, but you get the idea. Some interesting reactions. There's some good research actually on student evaluations and how professors react to it. This one article about whether professors or lecturers in this context feel like if they are able to influence these, and whether they feel like it relates to the factors relate to students or if it relates to them. And of course, we all have different reactions, but the worst reaction I believe we can have, and this is especially important for women, is a feeling of defeat and embarrassment and shame. And that actually does happen quite a bit from student evaluations. There are lots of problems in the contextual sense with student, quote, even evaluations. Even calling them student evaluations is a problem. At Ithaca College, we try to discipline ourselves to call them student statements and not to call them student evaluations. We feel like our peers are the only ones who are in a position to evaluate us. Students can certainly make statements, but their role is not to evaluate us. A second problem with these is it's often difficult to know whether students are evaluating the teaching or evaluating the course itself. This is really important, I believe, for especially junior faculty members, because they're often stuck teaching a course that is designed by someone else. And the students may not like the course. In fact, it may not be well designed. They may feel like they didn't learn much from it, but the professor may not have had much control over that. And so those things need to be better sorted out. A question that I always ask is, do professors get to evaluate the class? So at the end, we get this stack of student statements, do we get to make a statement about how we felt the course went or what we felt went on? And, in fact, it's really a measure more of satisfaction versus learning. And I think there's a big problem about asking students things like how much they feel like they've learned, because they may not be in a good position to assess that when we are asking them that. I'm sure many of us have taught courses that students feel like they either didn't learn anything or what they learned was not relevant. And then they come back 10 or 20 years later and say, that course that I had with you that I hated, blah, 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 it was the most important thing I ever took, but I had to grow up or get to be a manager or whatever to understand the value of it. The research shows that actually student evaluations have very little correlation to what students have learned, and that difficult courses are generally rated lower. Common complaints. The professor didn't explain the content clearly, didn't stick to the syllabus. The grading wasn't fair or the expectations weren't clear. Some of it is around the personality or perceived personality. Professors was unapproachable, unavailable, or harsh. There can be criticisms of the climate, that the professor's behavior was problematic. Students may feel that there were microaggressions or they were treated unfairly or that the professor didn't handle situations in the classroom well. And then just in general, I didn't learn anything or it was boring. So what are some solutions to that? When students feel like the content was not explained clearly, it can be helpful to do spot quizzes or application questions, exercises. But often what I find is that I need to be clear about what they need to do outside of class. Oftentimes the students feel like they're coming in and it's story hour and that they should be getting everything that they need in the lecture, when in fact, in certain classes, they're expected to be reading things and absorbing it. And in the classroom, we are just reinforcing it or discussing that. But sometimes that's not clear to students. Sometimes we're teaching courses in which there's not one correct answer, and students are still looking for that. So they feel we're not being clear when we're not giving them some very prescriptive formula. I get that a lot because I teach a lot of courses that rely on some aspect of creativity when there isn't one right answer, and they feel that I'm just not being clear enough or that I'm holding back from them. And they need to understand that there, in fact, can be multiple correct approaches. They complain if you don't stick to the syllabus. And in fact, there can be good reasons for not sticking to the syllabus, but I find that you have to explain that quite a bit and more than once, why you're explaining the syllabus. Again, when they feel like the grading wasn't fair or expectations weren't clear, I have gotten better at using rubrics, trying to give them samples, or ahead of time having them evaluate some samples and telling me whether they think that was a good assignment or a good response. Sometimes they'll say professors weren't approachable, unavailable. I think we have to be extremely clear about when we are available to meet, how we're available to meet. If we can have one-on-one meetings, if our load permits that, that always helps. If the professor behavior is problematic, I think it helps to have some kind of agreement in the beginning of class on what the norms are going to be and how everyone should react together if something goes wrong in class. And finally, our favorite one, I didn't learn anything. It was boring. Mixed modalities in class. use pretests, relate class content to something they say they're interested in, and help students reflect themselves on their accomplishments. I have gotten, even in intro classes, to give students some assignments that I tell them they should polish, not just for me, but to put in their portfolios. And then they feel like it reinforces to them what in fact they did learn. Again, the evidence says that professors at the top and the bottom of evaluations tend to have the lowest learning gains. So even professors who are rated very highly, actually, a lot of times students are not learning much. Some of the real problems that are arising in the literature are that student evaluations are so impacted by groupthink and by in just the first few minutes, they decide whether they like you and are going to like the class. And if you're coming in with some reputation or their friends have set up certain expectations, it's very difficult to get beyond that. We find that they can be very harsh and they will get back, they'll try to get back at you to justify their own failure. So if they feel like they're not doing well, it comes out often in a way that's like blaming the professor. On the other hand, students can be too lenient if they like a professor and they feel like they're being treated well. I found that as a dean, that we had one professor who was just way, 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 way out of date. Sweet guy. And students would laugh about it. They'd come to my office and tell them they weren't learning anything, but I'd read his evaluations and it was like he walked on water. So I had no evidence to have a tough discussion with him because at the end of every semester, it seemed like everything was going well. But it's just because they almost kind of felt sorry for the guy. It's easier for students to be satisfied with courses that they feel are immediately applicable and have tangible skills. There's obviously a real selection bias in who responds and how. At Ithaca College, our students do not have to fill out an evaluation to get their grades. In some places, that is instituted, and I think that's a good idea. But, as in most other kinds of survey research, we know that people who either really, really liked it or really, really didn't like it are the ones who respond. The ones who just felt like it was okay may not take the time at all to respond. However, with all these things that I've said that are very negative and problematic about student evaluations, overall, considered holistically, they're usually not too far off base. A very interesting website, if you want to Google it at some point, there's an interactive chart that lets you explore the words used to describe male and female teachers in about 14 million reviews from our favorite site, ratemyprofessor.com. You can go onto this and look at it in real time. There are real problems about the gender differences in the way that students rate their professors, which I think is something really important for us in this session to acknowledge. So a lot of times it's really difficult to even know how to deal with it. So here's another little excerpt from my evaluations last year. One student said, very hands-on, liked the structure of the class, helped orient himself in self-assignment, semester-long projects. Another one just yes. And then nobody in the class had any idea what was going on, the entire class. Okay. So what do you do when you get such disparate kinds of remarks? Another situation, I taught 3 sections of the same course. Students were similar. The times were not really off. It was not like one was 8 a.m. or something. Sections 1 and 3 were very positive. Section 2, I couldn't believe it. I've never read such terrible reviews of myself in my life. I was harsh, I was unclear, I was unfair. Nobody understood anything. Nobody could understand the assignments, completely different from sections 1 and 3. And it was very difficult to know what was going on there, but it was because there was groupthink going on and there were a few students who were malcontents and spread that to everyone else in their section. But as an administrator, I will say some things to keep in mind. It's worrisome if you have no negative comments. As a dean, if I read things like, oh, Professor Gayeski is so nice, her classes were always good, it was fun, I enjoyed it, you know, and everything just seemed to be okay, I worry about those because we expect professors to challenge students. We expect that students will get upset and think things were a little too tough, or that maybe the professor was harsh. I just think it's not very interesting if you read all these comments and nobody had any pushback. We also expect an adjustment period if you're new to teaching a course or to certain kinds of students, or certainly new to an institution. We expect that there's going to be an adjustment time. And we don't focus on the outliers or the times that we know there were challenges. Of course, during COVID, you know, everybody was confused and upset, right? But the most important thing, I think, for those of us thinking about mentoring is, do you acknowledge and work on your problem areas? I never had a hard time with professors who would read the student evaluations, look at the things that they thought were constructive and that they could improve on, and articulate what they are doing to shore up their teaching. You know, I think students, it's important to know how they think. In high school, especially if we're teaching undergrads, they've had a lot of structure in high school, and it can be very difficult for them to break out of that. And what they are really thinking is, how does this professor make me feel? So are they feeling confused or confident or overwhelmed or ashamed? So as they're doing their evals, they are thinking about, how does the professor make me feel? And now, in a way, especially given some level of maturity, how am I going to make that professor feel? And am I going to get a good grade? Can I predict how the course is going to go? Does the professor like me? They're even kinder if you're harsh with them, but they feel like you like them. And the classroom is a safe space. And again, very important what the peers say about their professor. So I think, you know, to kind of wrap things up, because I know we're going to be getting to the end of this soon, I'd like to think about ways that we can make evaluations more of a mutual learning opportunity than something that is punitive. I think it's very important for students to understand what's done with their comments. I think we get these snarky responses because they don't know that these things are being held forever in somebody's response, and that a dean, or could be even a president or a provost, is reading these comments. Sometimes they say something that's like an inside joke because they think it's just the professor reading it. They often evaluate you in the way they feel you evaluated them. And can we make them less defensive? One of the things that I have started to use is in some classes, I will use AI to provide some feedback along with my own feedback. So I won't do this with an entire paper, but for example, if I'm teaching a business writing course and students are writing a report, I might put their first couple of paragraphs into AI and have it suggest a stronger opening. And I'll put that next to mine. And interestingly enough, I found the students are much less defensive. They actually kind of chuckle about it when they get a response from AI, or have other peers evaluate it, so they don't feel like it's just personal and it's not just coming from their professor. And having multiple check-in points for feedback so that we can catch things. Ask students early on or at midterm, how are things going? Do you feel like we need to go faster, slower? Should we go back on things? What's working for you? What's not working for you so that it doesn't all come at the end when it's obviously too late. The students we find more than ever, are writing really cruel comments. And I think a lot of it is that they're collected at the end of the semester when students are most anxious. At least at Ithaca College, they're collected before final exams. And so at that point, students are buried in other exams. They haven't gotten their final grade. They may feel like they're doing more poorly. They may not feel like they can successfully finish. I actually feel like usually after they've gotten their grade, they finish their project, is like, whew, like that was actually pretty good, and everybody's clapped for them, or they've taken the exam. It's like, I actually feel like I did okay. But right before, they're really anxious. Also, the anonymity and the de-individualization. They feel like they're just submerged. Nobody knows who they are. At Ithaca College, the instructor is supposed to walk out of the room when the students do their online evals, and that limits empathy. Some of them may feel like they're saving other students from this bad experience. And again, a lot of them are just being upset at themselves for not learning. Like, did I get what I paid for out of this? And so it's usually a bad time, and I think we can do better as institutions about this. But the most important thing I will say is don't let it
I never found
change
you funny. I never found you entertaining. I never found you smart. I just found you annoying.
All right, please go back and watch that whole thing. But I used to hyperfixate on student evaluations. And I stopped when I realizing that I was becoming a shell of who I was because, and to be honest, my evaluations have always been wonderful. They've been wonderful overall, but I'd always look at the comments, and every single semester, without fail, I'd get one student that say, it'd be a different variation of the same thing. Basically, I'm too aggressive in my teaching. And for some reason, it just would get under my skin. Like, I'd even see it as, well, you can't be perfect. It would get under my skin. And so I'd find myself when I'm teaching, I'd remember that comment and I'd soften my voice and I'd kind of make my body smaller, and I was changing who I was.
So I'm happy to take questions and hear your feedback.
Very nice talk. Thank you very much, Diane. As usual, very interesting that you have been invited, actually, because I found it very, very interesting what you're saying. I don't know if we have questions. If not, I have a question. So I was wondering during your presentation about student evaluation, how does it work for neurodivergent students? Because in those cases, the evaluation can be biased, or how do you think about that? If you have already experiences with this kind of students, or
what an interesting question. The whole question about how to deal in general with neurodivergent students in the classroom is huge. I don't know about any of you, but at Ithaca College, it's about 20% of our undergraduate students in our classes have some kind of filed accommodation. Of course, we don't know who has written which evaluations, and if there is any correlation to the neurodivergency of those students. I think it would be a really interesting study. But it does certainly make the teaching more complicated because you're trying to reach students who have different needs and preferences. I think in some ways what we have seen in in-person interactions, when we do know who is saying what in person, that some students who have been identified or identify themselves as neurodivergent can be much more cruel in the way that they express their feelings about a class. So I wouldn't be surprised if that comes across in their evaluations as well. But what a great study.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to have, because I had this situation in the lab, actually. And the problem is that I didn't know that I have a neurodivergent student. So also the work with him was a bit difficult, but I didn't know anything about his problem. And I figured out after that, and that was more complicated actually in the end. But he did a good job finally after I found out. So I think it's important to know that. So finally, it's not good to have only good evaluations, right?
I think so.
Not a good thing.
I've had many of those conversations in committee decisions. It seems like we need to be a little more edgy. And we take, of course, seriously anything where it seems like professors are being unprofessional or negligent. But if it's that, they feel like things were a little too challenging, it moved too fast, or, the professor was a little harsh with them, I think in some cases that was warranted. And so, I think committees will read these things and we laugh at it more than not. So I think it's really important for people to be themselves, be their authentic selves, and not be intimidated by student evaluations.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Karen in the chat. Do you have any idea how students feel about international teachers? Do they ever show any bias toward them?
What a great question. Yes, I mean, there's research that shows that anybody who is different than they are can have much more harsher evaluations. So male students evaluate women professors much more harshly. I think there are differences in race. And I would say that I'm not aware of any research that's particular to international teachers, but I would suspect that there are some differences. I know in my years of reading evaluations, students will often say cruel things like they can't understand this person or they don't speak English well or something like that.
That's a problem. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you again, Diane. Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me.
I was very glad that you join us finally today.
Thank you.
So, Amanda, can we